Thanks for tuning in to Meet the Candidates 2018. Today our guest is Ted Green, Democratic candidate for the 6th District of the United States House of Representatives. Thanks for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great. Well, as a reminder to our viewers out there, 435 seats in Congress. Every 2 years they come up for re-election. Each member of Congress represents roughly 720,000 people. The 6th Congressional District is one of 6 here in Kentucky, and the 6th District extends all the way to the west here in Frankfort and Franklin County, to the east up to Flemingsburg, Fleming County, including Lexington, down south towards Richmond, north into Georgetown, Scott County, and as far north as Mount Olivet in Robertson County. So primary election is on Tuesday, May 22nd, and the winners of the Democratic and Republican primaries will face off in the general election on Tuesday, November 6th. Thanks again for joining us. We appreciate it. So let's start with, who is Ted Green and why is he running for Congress?
I've been around a long time, done an extensive amount of traveling. I was born and raised in Montana, and through various job things, family things, I ultimately ended up here in Kentucky. And this was about the time that of the presidential elections. And early on, I thought, okay, this is a joke. You know, this guy's, he's making fun of us. He's, making. But as it got closer, I began to think, there's a lot of people serious about this guy. And at the same time, I'm thinking, okay, there's a chance now that he just might win into the White House. And after 8 years of Obama, when his administrations first started up, the Republicans dug in their heels in the Congress, and they says, we're not going to do anything. We're just going to ride this guy out. And then at the end of his term, we'll get a Republican president, and we'll start making the laws and doing the things that we think needs to be done. And at about that time, that I really began thinking seriously, because I started politics years ago. I was in New York, and I was handing out pamphlets for Bobby Kennedy, and then over the years, different candidates, and I do different things, but I was always in the periphery of politics, and I never really thought so much about getting into them until, even at the beginning of the Obama administration, I thought, okay, things are going to straighten out, and we'll get everything back in order, and we'll undo some of the previous damage that's been done by both Democrat and Republican presidents. Clinton was a good president, but I think he could have done better. I think he did some things that shouldn't have been done, but that's, they all do that. And so I didn't think too seriously about running at that time, because I figured, well, it's not going to do any good. So I just let it go. But until then, January, I said, okay, this is it. I just can't sit idly by. I can't just go to street corners and hand out pamphlets. I have to do something. And the only thing I could think of was to either run for Congress or just sit down, shut my mouth, and watch TV. Well, I can't do that. So I started doing research, talking to people, learning as much as I could about the current issues. And by the time November comes around, and then even, if I get elected in January, there could be a whole new bunch of agendas that need to be dealt with. And maybe some of these other things that are going on right now may also have been taken care of. So, or even partially to the point where that they can stand on their own and they can keep moving forward. So we move on to new things. So okay, I'll do the current research. What's up? What's going on now? What's going on with women's issues? What's going on with the guns thing? The infrastructure is shot, not only in Kentucky, but all over the country. There's, the jobs. Kentucky is like the lowest of employed people, one of the lowest in the country. And this needs to be dealt with because this creates a whole lot of problems. And one of them is the opioid crisis that's going on now. Obviously, when you don't have anything to do, you just, you can't just, people just can't sit around. And a lot of people, they just take the drugs to alleviate some of the pain and misery they're going through. They got to forget that I can't feed my family. The mortgage company's going to come and take my house any day now. The repo guys are going to come and haul my car away. And so they start with the, there's not everybody's going to do that. But there's that segment of people who do turn to escape mechanisms, and that's one of them. Suicide by guns is another escape mechanism. And then these things have to be really looked at hard. This whole thing about, the schools in Kentucky are considered, again, like not quite the worst in the nation, but, they're right down there with, some of the others, Montana, Wyoming, Alaska. I think those are correct. And their schools are as bad as or worse than. But those are rural, very rural states. So it's like, okay, where are they going to get the money from? So here in Kentucky, the structures themselves need repair. They need teachers. They need to pay the teachers a decent wage. The teachers need to have their pensions left alone. The teachers need to keep their tenure. So all that, I think, needs to be fixed. I think that one of the worst things in the school system that could happen is their charter schools. They're very divisive because, first off, anybody can start a charter school. If I had the money to go out and buy a building big enough to house, say, 50 or 100 students, I could start my own charter school, hire the people I want as teachers, and as I understand it, they don't necessarily have to have the education, I can't think of the word for it, certification. So if I majored, if I went in and applied for a job as a teacher, as a history teacher, I could have majored in history in college, but I would not have taken any education courses. My sister was a teacher for 20 plus years, and I've talked a lot with her about this because she was teaching in California, and they were bringing in, they were starting with the charter schools. And at that point, she decided, well, she'd had her years in, so she took her retirement and moved to Oregon. So what happens in these charter schools is, in my mind, not a good thing because they interview the students. And I'm assuming that they also interview their parents as well. So I would take my kid in for an interview, get him into charter school. And they're going to look at us and say, well, these people look fairly wealthy, upper middle class. The kid's pretty bright. He's got a good, I'm losing words today. Grade point average. He's got a good GPA. And he likes music and sports. Okay, so, he's in. A Latino kid comes in or a black kid comes in and they look at him and say, okay, he's not exactly the whitest person in the world. He's dressed nice, but you can tell his clothes are from Kmart or Walmart or wherever. And so there's no money in this kid because charter schools get some money from donations from the parents and stuff. So that's important to them, to the charter school. So this kid, his parents are not going to be able to donate any money or maybe a little bit. So they say, well, we're sorry, folks, but, we've assigned all our seats. So the kid has to go back to public school. Here's the serious problem of all that. Each state is allowed, in federal monies, X number of dollars. So what's going to happen, what happens in the charter schools is 1/3 of those dollars go to the public schools, where the poorer kids are. The other 2/3 go to the charter schools, where all the upper class, middle, upper class people can take their kids. So the public schools are not going to change. They no longer have as much money as they once had. And even all the money that they once had, they still couldn't do all the things that they needed to do. Some of them have furnaces that are old. They barely keep the schools warm. And so there are these kind of repairs that need to be done. But since these people who want the charter schools, they're going to funnel all this money over to them. And my thinking is that, okay, fine, you want to start a charter school, you better dig into your pocket and you pay for it. You pay for all the stuff that needs to be done in a school. And let the public schools have their 100% of their money. But that's not the way it works. So I'm having a real hard time with those, and I really think that's something that needs to be changed. I think Betsy DeVos, she didn't come up with it all by herself, because charter schools have been started not too many years ago, but they've been quietly moving it to different places, and just kind of not necessarily taking over, but they're they're working on getting the chunk of the money from donations from the state, from the federal government, and without certified teachers, I can't imagine they're going to get the best education. Also, at the end of the school year, all the teachers are essentially fired. If they want their job back, they have to reapply for it. Now, if I've got 10 years of teaching in public schools or wherever, and I come back in and my salary's at $40,000, and I come back and apply for my job, well, we're sorry, but we've hired a history teacher already. And what they wouldn't tell me is that this history teacher is fresh out of college, and this person is happy getting $30,000. Bingo, there goes $10,000 back into their pocket. So that's a problem I think that really needs to be addressed, because literally the whole world is running so far ahead of America in terms of turning out educated kids. Since World War II, Japan especially has concentrated on educating their kids, and they're doing it, and they're outpacing us. They've been outpacing us for a long time, and they're outpacing us in electronics, engineering, all the hard sciences, and even some soft sciences. They're way ahead of us. And we've got kids who they can all use a computer and an iPhone. That's not the problem. The problem is that, if you say, okay, I want to program on this thing, and I want you to code it. Well, the first thing he's going to say is, well, I really don't know what a code is. But you're faster on the computer. Even I still don't know what a code is. So this is a big problem. Bill Gates, at one point, a couple of years ago, said that he was going to put $2 billion into, he was going to put $2 billion into making sure that the entire country had wideband internet. This is something that Kentucky is lacking. There's no real wideband here. There is in some places, but there are special interest groups that are paying to keep wideband out of Kentucky. If they had wideband, there would be more companies moving in to sell their products, build factories, call centers, whatever, which would be, a big boost in income tax money for the state. But there are companies that are saying, oh, you don't have broadband, we can't go there because we depend on broadband. This is their lifeblood. It keeps them flowing, it keeps them moving. Because companies now are, for the most part, are dealing internationally as well as nationally. And the broadband thing is what, keeps them talking on almost an instantaneous basis.
How does a congressman from the 6th District of Kentucky work to fix an issue like broadband in the United States Congress?
I'm not sure that he's really doing anything. I looked at his record.
No, I'm talking about, I maybe didn't phrase that well. you're elected and you're serving come January 2019. How does the congressman for the 6th District of Kentucky help to bring broadband to Central Kentucky?
Well, I think the first thing that's going to have to happen is that it'd have to write a bill that requires the state to bring in broadband within a certain amount of time. And something like that, anytime you're doing a bill, from what I can understand, it's kind of best if you can find somebody on the other side. So if I could team up with a Republican, say, okay, let's talk about this broadband thing. It's okay, this is cool, let's do it. So we'd write up the broadband. We'd write up the bill, present it to Congress, and then it's from then on. It's the procedure. They talk about it. That goes into committee. If the committee thinks this is a good idea, they'll send it back to the floor, and the floor talks about it. And if they think it's a good idea, they'll sign off on it, and it'll go to the Senate. And then they start that same procedure all over again.
Well, let me ask you about that. I'll circle back to broadband in a second, but
okay.
Much has been written and talked about, and I think everybody could agree that in the last few decades, there really is a lack of bipartisanship in Congress. And what experience do you have that has prepared you to work in a politically divided Congress? I mean, how could you reach across an aisle like that?
I think I spent close to 15 years in social work. And this is one of the main things you've got to do, is you've got to bring, two different parties together. And you've got to be very diplomatic because in this case, emotions are running extremely high. So you have to get them, you have to talk to the one party, the offended party, and, get them to agree to sit down with, their parents. And then once you can accomplish that, then you can get maybe some dialogue going between the three of you, the parents, the child, and yourself. And then if all this works out, then you could just let them work out their issues, because by then they're pretty calm. They understand what the issues are. And I think this experience would help me. There's going to be people who can say, well, being a social worker 15 years certainly doesn't prime you for a congressman. Well, no, that's true. It doesn't. But it gives me insights into people. And I think that's a lot of what's missing is, they look at people on the surface. This guy's a right-wing nut, simply because he's wearing, like the camouflage clothes. Well, he might be the most liberal guy in the world, but you don't know. But on the whole, there's people who are pretty quick to judge. And I think that might be a part of a problem in Congress, is it's like the Democrats are on this side and the Republicans are on this side, and thou shalt not cross the middle line. I was thinking, somewhat facetiously, is that they should, in the House, they should sit in the rows of seats, is it Republican, Congress, or Democrat, Republican, Democrat? And that's, in a sense, that's kind of a good idea, but it's that would never fly. It would never, no.
All members of Congress are assigned specific committee assignments. Mm-hmm. Some of it's based on politics, obviously. Some of it's based on the experiences of the individual House or Senate member. Mm-hmm. Are there specific committees that you have an interest in serving on, and how will that affect, or how is that important to Central Kentuckians?
I think I would want to serve on, I'm not sure what the committee might be called, but certainly one that has to do with infrastructure, and one that has to do with jobs, and one that has to do with schools. And I'm vacillating on the military because the military gets, they get almost the whole pie. And I think that, they get billions of dollars. And I think if you shave off $1 billion and give it to the schools, it's going to go a long ways. And if I were the congressman for Kentucky and I was able to, to push this idea through, then maybe Kentucky would get, not quite the lion's share, but a big chunk of that $1 billion. And the rest going to, like other states that, that are desperate for it, West Virginia, especially western West Virginia. They've got the same kind of problems as eastern Kentucky. And there are other states, that could use it. Something that's really terribly important, I think, is this whole environmental thing. Now, right now, the Secretary of the Interior is doing his level best to chop up our national parks and national monuments so that their rich friends can bring in their oil drilling rigs, natural gas rigs, coal mining equipment, whatever minerals they can find on or near these places. Right now, the law says that nobody's allowed to touch them. You can't go in there and do whatever you want. Well, these guys are trying to, well, they're not trying to, they're doing it. There's one place, I think it's in Utah, Bears Ears Park. And that's, most of that park is sacred Indian territory. And I mean, it's like going into your family plot and sliding the headstone of your grandfather's side and plunking down your drilling rig. And that's essentially what they're doing to the Native Americans. And I think that's something that really needs to be corrected. So, yeah, those are the committees I would, that I don't, that I would really want to work on. Because growing up in Montana, we actually spent a couple of years on the reservation. And it was fascinating. At that time, my father was a barber. And a lot of times, there were a number of the Native Americans would come in, and they'd bargain with my dad. And for X number of haircuts, my dad would get the haunch of a buffalo for steaks. So it was, they were back to a barter system because there's no money. There's absolutely no money on the reservations.
Well, you've touched on infrastructure a couple of times, so let's spend a minute there if you don't mind. Is one of the things the president ran on, and that over the course of his first 15 or so months, and we taped this at the end of March, and I know this program's going to play back in April and May, so things may change, but as they pass the omnibus bill, the spending bill, that's the last major piece of legislation you're going to see out of Congress, most people think, for the remainder of 2018. Everybody else is going to go home and run for re-election, basically, is what it looks like. So it looks as if they've kicked the infrastructure bill down to 2019. So it'll be there waiting for the Congress when they get back. Bridges, roads, broadband being a piece of that is what has been talked about. What do you think are the most important infrastructure type needs for the 6th Congressional District that you would want to work on if you find yourself there in Washington, D.C. next January?
The roads.
The roads.
I think, yeah, the roads are, that's the biggest problem right now, because if they bring in broadband, then companies are going to look to build here, and they're going to need to move in heavy equipment. These roads are not going to handle too much heavy equipment. Some of them, and I think especially in the eastern part of the state, the roads are crumbling. And you drive, a 20-ton rig over those things a number of, enough times, and it's just going to be like gravel. So that, I think, would be the most important thing, is that, I had one other thought, but I lost it now.
Are there other things that we haven't covered today that you'd like to talk about? We've got a couple of minutes left, and are there some things that you'd really want to make sure that we talk about while we're here today?
I would like to talk about the gun issue, because that's right now that's volatile.
Absolutely.
And nobody has a real solution. Let's make background checks tougher. Okay, fine, but the other side of that coin is that a lot of these people who are doing this mass killings, they've got mental issues, and there's others who don't. They just, for whatever reasons. But I have to wonder, I mean, how are you going to get around this mental issue problem? I mean, you walk into a gun shop, you say, I want that AK-47 up there. It's okay, 30-day waiting period, we're going to run a background check and, see how it's going. Have you ever been in a mental institution? I say, no, I'm, okay. So he leaves, and 30 days later, he comes back and gets his gun. In Japan, if you want to buy a gun, they have 3 steps, but the second step is the mental health issue. Now, before you can buy a gun in Japan, you have to spend, I think, a minimum of 4 hours with a psychiatrist. And if the psychiatrist goes back and says, well, this guy's, he's just a tad off, they'll say, okay, sorry, no gun for you. And, in this country with 300 million people and 320 million weapons out there, and, people are buying guns on a daily basis. They would have to hire, who knows, thousands of psychiatrists to handle this load. So that's not going to work in this country. There's a lot of things like that wouldn't work. But I think that's something that we really need to talk about. And I'm not saying I'm anti-gun. I'm not. I've owned guns before. But what I'm saying is, the citizens, the average Joe, these guys have guns, but they use them for hunting or for sporting or for whatever. Nobody needs military-style weapons. So most of these, well, a lot of citizens have them, but they just like to go out and, just shoot up the gun range for a while and go home and kick back. And on the other hand, there's these guys that will, take their mother's guns, steal them, make a straw purchase, and go into a school, parking, or shopping mall, whatever, theater, and shoot up the place.
Yeah.
How do you keep these military weapons off the streets?
I appreciate the comments on that. We've run out of time. We appreciate you coming in today. Ted Green, Democratic candidate for the 6th District of the U.S. House of Representatives. Thanks again for coming in. Remember to get out there and vote on Tuesday, May 22nd.
Absolutely.
And tune in to live election coverage right here on FPB TV on election night. Thanks again for tuning in. Thanks again for coming by today.
Thank you.
Have a good day.